Safe sport during COVID-19. Liability consideration for Canadian sporting organization. On March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization (WHO) declared the novel coronavirus COVID-19 a global pandemic. By the end of March 2020, almost every recreational, amateur, and professional training and sporting event was cancelled worldwide. In an unprecedented step, the Olympic Games were postponed to summer 2021, and professional sport leagues were indefinitely suspended. Now, over 4 months later, major efforts have and continue to be undertaken to facilitate the return of safe sport at all levels. In Canada, the National COVID-19 Return to High Performance Sport Task Force, led by On the Podium CEO Anna Merklinger, has developed a series of resources to assist in the return to sport for all amateur sport, including recreational and community-based organizations. The COVID-19 Return to High Performance Sport Framework, which includes a COVID-19 risk assessment for sport and a club risk assessment and mitigation checklist tool, is the blueprint for assisting Canadians in returning to sport. The framework is intended to act as the minimum standard and should be applied while considering the specific nature of the sport and the participant. While Canada has progressively permitted return to sport, the return of competition is also moving forward. Some international sporting organizations have already begun to resume, and many more professional sport leagues are set to engage momentarily. Major League Baseball (MLB) is scheduled to return to play on July 2020. However, due to the concern about the risk associated with the league's travel schedule, the Canadian federal government has refused to allow the Toronto Blue Jays to play in Canada when the season reopens. The National Basketball Association (NBA) is set to return on July 30, 2020, with all games played without spectators in Walt Disney World, Florida. The National Hockey League (NHL) is scheduled to return on August 1, 2020, with teams quarantining in Toronto and Edmonton and playing a unique playoff format without spectators. Meanwhile, the task force is also working on preparing a framework for return to competition. This framework will address issues applicable at both the domestic and international level, acknowledging that each will present different risks and considerations. Legal liability in the return to sport context. In developing the return to sport and return to competition framework, the task force has not only focused on protecting the health and safety of the athlete, but also the coaches, staff, and the communities in which they live and train. The task force has grounded their work in the values and principles enunciated in the Canadian sport policy, which has been effective in Canada from 2012 to 2022. Importantly, the safe return to sport involves assessing the exposure or potential exposure of participants, the location of the sporting event, and the mitigation strategies that can be implemented to reduce risk. The key to reducing legal liability is to then implement the appropriate policies, procedures, and guidelines to reduce risk of disease transmission. While Canadian courts have not yet addressed claims against sporting organizations for injuries sustained as a result of disease transmission, there is case law to suggest potential ground for such an action. Generally speaking, the operator for a sporting event or facility holds a duty to exercise reasonable care when organizing and supervising activities to prevent injury to participants. While Canadian law broadly recognizes that participants in sporting activities accept the ordinary and necessary risks that are incidental to the sport, participants may nevertheless bring civil action against operators where they have acted negligently in the administration of sporting events or activities. Accordingly, to minimize potential injury or harm to participants in the sporting context, Canadian courts have already recognized that the sporting operator's responsibility may involve the following: preventing crowding, using or implementing efficient supervision and control, giving necessary instruction and warning, selecting and fitting proper and suitable equipment, and taking reasonable precaution to see that conditions for an activity are not unduly hazardous. Thank you.